Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Autodesk University 2021, class CES 5000075. Take your pick, object selection in AutoCAD. I'm Scott Wilcox. I'm a senior CAD designer at Morrison Hershfield in Edmonton, Alberta. And welcome. As you know, I just said I'm Scott. I'm a senior designer with Morrison Hershfield here in Edmonton, Alberta. I've been an AutoCAD user since the early 1990s, and I've been using Civil 3D for about 15 years. I'm an AU veteran. This is my 15th Autodesk University, and this is my second time as a speaker. You know, one thing I really appreciate about the AutoCAD community is the willingness to share and teach knowledge and expertise, and I'm hoping to continue that by sharing with you today some things that I think are important to all users, both new and experienced. I'm very excited to be presenting to you. You know, object selection is a critical and common part of every AutoCAD user's time. Now, let's have a look at making object selection more efficient, faster, and more accurate. Let's talk briefly about what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at a lot of ways that you can select objects in AutoCAD. And really, it's one of the most important things that you do, because anytime you give a modify command, AutoCAD's going to ask you to select objects. Now, select objects can be as simple as hovering your pick box over an object and left-clicking to pick it, and it becomes selected, or it can be as complex as searching through information such as text, say, or through block libraries, or through other complex content to select the content that you want. While the range of selection options is vast, there's essentially two types of object selection. One is manually or graphically, and then the other is through selection tools or algorithms. Today, we're going to look at both, including ways to programmatically create selections and simplify repetitive tasks. Now, object selection is a fundamental aspect of AutoCAD and very important, but it's a very in-depth topic, and we definitely won't be covering all of the tools available. For example, we won't look at tools and features that are available in verticals of AutoCAD, such as Civil 3D, and nor will we look at products that are available by third parties. However, today's class will look at everything that's available within the full version of AutoCAD itself. And while we have an introduction to some programming in object selection, we'll only have an introductory look at that world today. As I mentioned, there's a lot of other things regarding object selection available that we just won't have the opportunity to cover today. But your handout will have an in-depth look at a fantastic tool in AutoCAD called the filter command. Now, I presented at AU 2019 on the filter command, and you can find that information by searching the Autodesk University website for class CES 323893. I'm also including some of the features of filter in today's handout as well. I started in architectural technology in the early 1990s, and the tech school that I attended had just transitioned from board drafting into AutoCAD. I fully believed at the time that AutoCAD was much faster and much more efficient and even more accurate than anything that was done by a manual draftsman. In my first job with an engineering company here in Edmonton, I was hired to replace a manual drafter who refused to learn AutoCAD and retired. Soon after I started, I worked on a major project that was so huge that many people in my company were involved. In fact, it was so busy that they hired the manual drafter out of retirement to work on the same project. I quickly learned that this fellow could create profiles with annotations, arrows, and labels as fast or even faster than I could. It was incredibly humbling to see the skill and efficiency that he exhibited. Near the end of the project, the client made a drastic modification, and the earth dam width had to be narrowed. Our board draftsman threw all of his cross sections into the garbage and started over, while I simply opened my DWGs and used stretch to change the dam width. It was then that I realized that the power of AutoCAD is not in the creation of content, but in the modification of it. And this is why object selection is so important to me. First objective in today's class is to understand and differentiate the primary object selection methods. Now, this first group I call mouse methods because we use graphical tools to select and identify objects in our selection. We'll have a look at each of these in a moment. The keyboard selections are launched by keyboard entry at a selection prompt. Remove and add are selection modes that can be activated by using the mouse along with the left shift key. Anytime you issue a modify command, AutoCAD prompts you to select objects. The crosshair is changed to a small square called a pick box, and hovering over and left-clicking any object will select it. You can continue to left-click, and each object picked will be added to the selection set. You can hit Enter to end object selection. Now, if you left-click in the drawing area, but not on an object, and drag the mouse to the right, a shaded rectangle will appear with blue shading and a solid border. This is a window, and the object selection will include everything that's completely inside of it. If you left-click on the drawing area but not on an object and drag the mouse to the left, a shaded rectangle would appear with green shading and a dashed border. This is called a crossing window, and the object selection will include everything completely inside it, plus everything that it touches. Window polygon is quite similar to window, and it's launched by typing WP at the select objects prompt. You can then make multiple clicks to define a boundary area, and the selection will include all objects that are completely inside of it. Crossing polygon is similar to crossing. It's launched by typing CP at the select objects prompt. The boundary defined will add to the selection set all objects completely inside of it, plus all objects that are touched by the boundary as well. The fence option is started by typing F at the select objects prompt. Users can create a multi-segmented line, and all objects that are touched by the fence are added to the selection. Lasso is a press and drag function, and it has three options. Pressing and dragging initially from left to right will create a free-form lasso that behaves like a window, a blue shaded area, and a solid boundary. The lasso selection will include everything that's completely inside the boundary. Beginning the lasso function from right to left creates a free-form lasso that behaves like a crossing. It's a green shaded area with a dashed boundary. It'll select everything that's inside of it, plus everything that it touches. Now you press the spacebar during lasso, and it'll cycle between window, fence, and the crossing options. It's a really fast and powerful way to control your object selection. Let's look at some ways using the keyboard to create object selections. The first is all. Typing ALL will select all objects in the drawing space that is not on a locked or frozen layer. All will also select objects on off layers, so keep that in mind when using it. AutoCAD remembers the last selection set you created, and it can be recalled using the previous option. Issue a command, type P for previous, and it remembers the last selection set. It's a handy way to perform multiple edits on the same objects. Typing L for last selects the last object created in the drawing. The drawing variable select last mode, when set to 0, will limit that selection to the last visible object that was created. By default, select last mode is set to 1, and using the last option will select the last object in the entire drawing. When prompted to select objects, we are by default in add mode. By clicking, we are adding objects to the selection set. However, we can type R and enter remove mode, which allows you to remove objects that are already part of the selection set. Type R to remove and select the objects. Now all normal selection methods still apply, and you can also manage the add and remove modes on your keyboard by holding the Shift key to enter remove mode and not holding the Shift key to be returned back to add mode. Now let's look at objective 2. We're moving beyond just picking and clicking, and we're going to use the properties of objects and other AutoCAD tools in our object selection. The first one we'll look at today is Select Similar. It appears on the pop-up menu after an object is selected. You can match the object type and the object properties, and it has a set of select similar settings, which you can check or uncheck to refine your object selection range. Quick Select is a feature that is found on the upper right of the Properties palette, and it is based on the object type, and it will feature either one object property or one geometric property. It allows the use of logical operators, and you can create a new selection set from it. You can exclude objects from it, or you can add it to an existing selection set. Let's have a look at Select Similar and Quick Select. To access the settings for Select Similar, let's type Select Similar at the command line and then click Settings. The dialog box lists the object properties that are assessed when using Select Similar. With all of the boxes unchecked, the selection will be of every object of the same type, in this case, all the circles. We can refine similarities to include other properties, such as color, layer, line type, and so on. As each box is checked, the selection criteria narrows to include the checked property. As you can see, setting these criteria can have a huge impact on what objects are actually being selected. As for Quick Select, we launch Quick Select from the upper right corner of the Properties palette. There's a little lightning bolt on the icon. The first row of the Quick Select dialog box allows us to apply the selection to either the entire drawing, or we can click Select Objects to refine our selection. The object type can be multiple, or we can also define it to be any specific object type that exists in the drawing. When choosing multiple, the properties that are available are the general properties of all objects: color, layer, line type, etc. Choosing a particular object also gives us more properties specific to that object, such as center points of arcs or circles, heights of text, and so on. In this instance, let's select all the blocks in this drawing with the name Receptacle Normal. In the Quick Select dialog, we're going to look for the object type block reference. Now in the properties, we'll scroll down to find name, and we'll make sure the operator is set to equals. And then value will be the name of that block, which is Receptacle Normal. Make sure to include it in the new selection set, and we'll click OK. And here, AutoCAD has selected all of the blocks with the name Receptacle Normal. Now I noticed in the last example that not all the blocks selected were on the correct layer. So let's use Quick Select to find those objects and correct it. We can launch the Quick Select dialog box. Make sure we apply it to the entire drawing. Choose block reference, and we'll start by first isolating all the blocks that are named Receptacle Normal. We'll choose block reference name equals Receptacle Normal, include, and click OK. Now we have all of these objects selected. Now let's relaunch Quick Select, and from here we can refine the current selection, the block reference whose layer is not equal to the correct layer, which is in this case electrical plug. We'll choose OK, and we now have the one block, in this case one object that's on the wrong layer, and in the Properties palette we can easily change it to the correct layer. So Select Similar can match by object type. It matches the properties, and it's based on the Select Similar settings that define how broad or narrow its its reach is. But we're limited to one object type, and there's really not much customization aside from those settings, and there's no saving. Every instance, it's going through from start again, aside from the settings. With Quick Select, it matches the object type, and then either the object properties or geometric properties. We can use logical operators, greater than, less than, equal to, not equal to, and so on. But we are still limited to one object type per selection, and there is limited customization and still no saving. There are some other fantastic object selection tools that we won't get to cover today. For example, there is Isolate Objects, which allows you to declutter your drawing content and allow you to access and modify your drawing much easier. Find is a fantastic object selection tool for text or strings inside of blocks, attributes, and so on. It is a great way to get at data that's in a text version. And of course, the fantastic AutoCAD command filter, where we can create complex object selection sets, save them, and reuse them from drawing to drawing. There's still more, and we'll cover. This will be covered in the handout. We'll tell you things like pick first and pick add and group, where you can create an object selection, give it a name, and you can access it easily by recalling that group name. There's selection cycling when you have multiple objects in the same location. There's a feature called legacy control pick, which allows you to use the control key to cycle through objects, and a nifty command called fast cell, which allows you to very quickly select objects that are connected to each other. Let's get on to objective 3. There can be a lot of reasons why your selection didn't meet your expectations. A likely cause is that the criteria in your selection method was either too narrow or too broad. And there are going to be instances where objects weren't selected because maybe they're on a frozen layer or a locked layer or in a different space. You may also expect objects to be selected, but they didn't, but perhaps it was because they aren't the type that you thought they were. For example, an object may look like a circle, but it's actually a block. Or an object may look like a dimension, but it was exploded and now it's just lines and text. You know, as nerdy and literal as we AutoCAD users are, and boy, AutoCAD is even more explicit. So keep this in mind when the expectations differ from your results. Now let's look at an example where our object selection doesn't match what our expectations are. I'm going to select this red circle here. It looks like many other red circles in the drawing. I'll right-click, choose Select Similar, and what I end up with is a very small selection and nowhere near the object selection I anticipated. In this case, it's because the Select Similar settings have all the criteria turned on. Now, if you disable in the settings, disable the line type and color, and choose OK, and then select the objects, the selection you end up with is much broader. You can also get an opposite effect where these selections are too broad, so keep that in mind. There are many ways to refine and define your object selections. Other issues you may have in object selections is that your objects may not be selectable. They may be in a different space, or they're locked, or they're frozen, or they may be the wrong object. So keep all this in mind, that the object selection really depends on the objects themselves. So although in AutoCAD's mind, the objects may look the same, they're actually quite different. All right, we're at our fourth objective already. And this is about using macros and Lisp to create custom selection tools. Now, since selection is a huge part of what we do routinely, having tools that can minimize repetitive tasks is a really, really valuable feature. There's lots of these available already in code as macros and in code as Lisp. And we're going to have a look at the process of creating a macro and creating a Lisp. Keep in mind, this really isn't a programming class, so I'm not going to be going deep into the code side of things. We'll just be exposing you to the mechanics of it and getting it to work for you. Macros are really powerful because they can be easily set up and they can be reused, which eliminates tedious and repetitive tasks. And once you have a macro created and loaded, it can be a permanent part of your workspace. So let's create a macro. Okay, we're going to use a macro to create a command that allows us to select every object on the layer just by selecting a single object. To access this and create it inside the CUI, which is the Customize User Interface. And we get there by typing CUI at the command line. Under the command list, we're going to click Create New Command. And then over on the right where it reads Command 1, here's our new command, and we'll name it Lay-Cell. We can give information for its description and display name, and we can even assign an image if you want. Let's choose one that looks like a layer for today's example. The real thing we want to focus on here, though, is the macro, which is a string of commands or instructions or steps that AutoCAD is going to execute every time the button is pressed. I've already defined it here today, so I'll just copy and paste it in. Now, the contents of this macro really isn't the focus of today's class, but I want to share it with you, and you can feel free to explore and experiment with it as much as you like. Now that we have the command defined, we can look for it in the command list. And then we can put it into our AutoCAD environment. We'll just type Lay-Cell to search for it. Here it is. I'm going to add it to my quick access toolbar as its location. So we'll just grab and drag it into that space. Then we'll click up. There it is. We'll click Apply, click OK. And there's the icon up in the quick access toolbar. And there's the name of it. Now, click on the icon and click any object, and every object on that layer is selected. Switching from drawing to drawing, AutoCAD will still execute the command, and this makes it super handy and powerful, and it was really easy to do. Lisp stands for list processing. It's a programming language that's been around as long as AutoCAD, and AutoCAD works with a version of Lisp called AutoLisp. There's some fantastic customization, and there's some extremely powerful Lisps that already exist that are shared amongst the community. And these communities include Autodesk forums and places like Augie and the Swamp. There's lots more out there. I have found that everybody is super helpful and collaborative and willing to help and help one another. It is a fantastic community. Now, today we're going to focus on how to get a Lisp that you already have working in your AutoCAD environment. So let's load a Lisp file. So I already have a Lisp file. It's called sbl.lisp that I'll share with you today. Now, inside of it, there's a command defined sbl select by layer, which allow you to select any object, and every other object on that layer will be added to the selection set. I'm going to show you how to add that command to your AutoCAD environment. Start by typing appload, or AP for short, and the appload dialog box will launch. You can browse for the folder location and select the file name that you want to load, and then click load. AutoCAD will report on the bottom when it's successfully loaded. Now, this Lisp will only work in the current session at this point. If you want it to work in every session, you need to take the file and you can drag and drop it into the startup suite. When you look in the startup suite, it now shows that every time AutoCAD initializes, it'll also load this file. We can close out, and now we should have the command SBL. AutoCAD prompts to select the objects, select any object, hit enter, and there are all the entities on that layer. I think it goes without saying that whenever possible, we should really leverage as best we can the tools and automation inside AutoCAD to help us build our selection set. All right, we did it. We looked at primary object selection methods using mouse and keyboard tools. We used object properties and tools in AutoCAD to create more complex selection based on object properties and features. We looked at instances when object selection really didn't function the way we expected it to. We also had an introduction at using macros and Lisp to create custom selection tools. Thank you so much for attending my class today. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'm here to do my best to answer them for you. And thank you again.